These days, it can be hard to trust the media. What's true, what's fake, and who is behind the message? I'm a freelance journalist and videographer who has spent years studying the media. Now I'm taking a look at what local, regional, and national news stories mean to us here in North Central Washington. I'm Dominick Bonny, and this is Common Sense. Hello and welcome to Common Sense. I'm Dominick Bonny, and in this episode, we're going to hear from Dr. Mark Johnson, who is one of two infectious disease experts at Confluence Health. We're going to cover the Delta variant, vaccine mandates, and more. But before we dive in, I want to touch briefly on the new state vaccine mandates for healthcare workers that were announced on August 9th. Predictably and understandably, they have a whole lot of people worked up. So worked up that some folks have taken to the streets in the days since that mandate announcement to protest this injustice and breach, as they see it, of their bodily autonomy. Bodily autonomy is, of course, the right for a person to govern what happens to their body without external influence or coercion. Now, in theory, our bodily autonomy should be sacred, right? It should be one of the red lines in our society, a line that others, whether they be governments, companies, individuals, should not be able to cross. Our bodies are our own, and no one, not doctors and scientists, bosses and politicians, pastors or priests, should tell us what to do with our bodies. I mean, it's my body, my choice, right? At least that's what some of the signs this week read. And clearly, these are pro-choice people through and through. I'm sure they're not just co-opting the signature phrase of a group they disagree with in an attempt to garner legitimacy. I mean, that would be kind of like using a phrase as universally acceptable as "save the children" to draw people into an anti-Semitic internet cult. But back to my body, my choice, because that should be something that we can all agree on. The problem is that my choice and my freedom to do something like swing my fists around randomly ends the moment that one of those fists connects with another person's body. Let me put it another way. If you're 21, you're free to drink alcohol legally, right? As an American citizen, you have the freedom to go to a bar and get drunk. However, you do not have the freedom to get drunk and then get behind the wheel of a vehicle and drive around. That's a danger to public safety. And I think that we can all agree that drunk driving is not conducive to public safety. So while we're able to make decisions that endanger our own health, we're not free to make decisions that endanger others' health. We are prohibited from driving drunk. This we know. And anyone who would actually argue against a ban on drunk driving because it limits personal freedom would be laughed out of any courtroom in America. As for vaccine mandates and their role in American society, there are more than 100 years of American legal precedents that have upheld vaccine mandates. And we'll take a look at one after this interview with Dr. Johnson.
So you're an infectious disease expert. What does it take to become an infectious disease expert?
Sure. So like any physician, after 4 years of college, then you do 4 years of medical school, then an internship where you're a physician but under supervision, so you have a medical license, then a 2-year internal medicine residency, followed by a 2 or 3 year clinical infectious disease fellowship. And I also, during that time, did an additional year to get a master's of tropical medicine.
Wow. So about 20 years, 2 decades of study.
Yeah, I think by the time you're done, you're in the 26th grade, I think, by the time you're all done with your training.
Wow. So you know what you're talking about. So, you've been treating hospitalized COVID-19 patients in our region for more than a year now, and between Chelan and Douglas counties, I was looking at the dashboard. It looks like, a little under 100 people in these 2 counties have passed because of COVID. What kind of a toll has that taken on you and your staff since the beginning of COVID?
Well, thanks for acknowledging that, Dominick. I would just start by saying thank you to all the frontline healthcare workers, whether they're in the hospital or outside the hospital, because the work that all of us has been doing has been a tremendous grind, to say the least. I know that everyone has been impacted by COVID in some way, shape, or form. It pervades every part of our life. But the impact of the pandemic is real for our healthcare workers. And I know that we continue to be short-staffed, in particular amongst nurses, because they're taking the brunt of this. Our nurses, respiratory techs, the people that are day in and day out with patients who are severely or critically ill from COVID. It is exhausting. And there's many days where it feels like there is just no end in sight. So that's certainly been difficult. For infectious disease doctors, we have 2 of us here at Confluence Health. We cover the 4-county region. About 80% of US counties have 0 infectious disease doctors. We're one of the smaller specialties. And we are part of our pandemic response, along with pulmonary critical care doctors and our hospitalists, et cetera, you name it. But we see patients admitted to hospital with other infections. Our other specialists see patients admitted to the hospital with other diseases, heart attack, stroke, cancer, et cetera, as the pandemic marches on. And the pandemic just layers on an additional profound number of patients. But it's not just the number of patients, it's also the profound intensity and duration of the treatment that they require when they're in the hospital, because these patients are very sick.
You know, we talked a little bit about fatigue. I think people have this information fatigue where it's like, it's a grind to keep paying attention because the news sounds so bad. And it's almost, it's a human nature to ignore something if we don't feel like we can control it. So why should we care about this variant?
Well, the Delta variant has changed the game. It is changing the game, and it has changed the game. And what I mean by that is this variant of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the virus that causes COVID-19 infection and disease, is much more transmissible than previous strains. This is what RNA respiratory viruses do. They mutate. And if we have a lot of the virus in our community, and we've had a lot of virus in our community, in the region, across the country for a long time, the virus is going to mutate normally. It's looking for ways to increase its fitness, its ability to continue to survive and make copies of itself and pass itself along. That's all a virus wants to do. It really doesn't care who it hurts. It doesn't care how it does it. It just wants to survive. And so some of the mutations that pop up in the virus in the community level or at a population level, they don't confer what I call increased fitness to the virus, meaning they don't provide a survival advantage to the virus. And so they just kind of go away. But with this Delta variant, this is much more transmissible than the previous Alpha variant that was really competitively outcompeted the other variant strains over the last several months. And it's much, much, much more infectious than the strain of SARS-CoV-2 virus, the D614G, that was circulating widely last summer. So why is this important? Well, a virus that's much more transmissible is much more infectious, and it does it 2 ways. The first way is that we now know from data published 10 days ago that people are infectious with this virus about 2 days earlier than they were with the old strain. So we know that people without symptoms can transmit this virus, but we know that people who are going to be symptomatic, they're infectious much earlier after being exposed. So that's one way, is the virus is transmitted earlier in someone's infectious course. And number 2, the amount of virus that's in our respiratory tract, in our lungs, and that's coughed up and shed to other people is much higher. Some estimates report that the amount of virus in the respiratory tract is about 1,032 times higher than the Alpha variant that we just had a couple months ago. This virus is just much more contagious or infectious to other people. And so that's the first thing that we have to know about this. That's why this virus has changed the game. And that is why the CDC updated its guidance on the 28th of July. I think some people are hearing that, 50% of the US is fully vaccinated now. Why the heck are these vaccines not working? And the answer is the vaccines are working. We're just stressing them too much. Mm-hmm. And so what we've come to realize over the last 10 days is that people who are fully vaccinated against COVID still can be infected with this Delta variant. And if they are infected, they are very likely to transmit it to someone else, just as if they're unvaccinated. But the difference is that fully vaccinated people are still much less likely to get infected by this variant. So there's still some optimism here that the vaccines are working. The vaccines are still very effective in preventing symptomatic COVID illness, and more importantly, still very effective in preventing severe COVID enough that you wind up in the hospital because you're sick enough.
Sure.
But it does seem that the vaccines are less effective to some degree against this variant in preventing infection. And that's critical to understand. So in other words, because this Delta variant is so much more transmissible, we kind of heard that, well, boy, 67 to 70% of us have to get immune to this virus till we reach herd immunity. That math has changed. And now it's closer to 85 to 90%. And so if we can't get enough people vaccinated, we're going to keep seeing more and more transmissible variants of this virus pop up. And that's where we are today.
Stay tuned for more after the break.
Are you a take charge kind of person? Consider a career as a health unit coordinator. You'll work to keep health facilities running efficiently by coordinating medical providers, patients, and departments. The Charter College Certificate in Health Unit Coordinator program can get you up to speed on basic patient care, health records management, health and safety procedures, and medical billing. And the 10-month online program includes a computer you keep. Get started at chartercollege.edu, where we work to get you to work.
At Wenatchee Power Sports, we proudly offer the Polaris product line. Polaris builds the highest quality side-by-side in the industry, with off-road capability that's second to none. The Polaris pre-order program allows customers to purchase the vehicle they want without having to select from limited dealer inventory. The Wenatchee Valley has year-round access to some of the best ORV trails in the Northwest. Start your adventure here at Wenatchee Power Sports.
Your search for quality patio furniture with excellent customer service is over. Blue Lagoon is proud to offer only the finest outdoor furniture and accessories from some of the most renowned manufacturers in the industry. Our showroom showcases a large selection of in-stock furniture, fire pits, umbrellas, cushions, and outdoor accessories. Our in-house outdoor decor specialist is available to help you design and custom order the perfect furniture for your unique space.
Welcome back. Let's get back to my interview with Dr. Mark Johnson.
So we're speaking a couple hours before the governor is set. We're recording this on August 9th, Monday. The governor is going to go on television and is expected to announce vaccine mandates for state employees. I would just like to get your take on that and see if, as a public health, expert, if you think that is going to probably be something that those of us in the private sector are going to expect, because usually that's kind of how it goes. The government, the federal government, state governments do something, and then the private sector follows.
I think that's possible. I don't have the best crystal ball in this regard, because most of my job is taking care of individual patients with severe COVID disease and then educating our healthcare workers about what they need to know about this virus and about the vaccine and about the disease. But we have heard a lot of public health authorities and even the Infectious Disease Society of America, which is our group of infectious disease doctors across the US, have advocated that vaccines be required for certain vulnerable populations, to include healthcare workers. And so folks might have heard that a lot of healthcare organizations are taking a long look about whether they should require vaccines for all healthcare workers who haven't yet been vaccinated. Some states have already taken that step. I think it was last week, California was moving toward that, about requiring it for all healthcare workers. And so I think each healthcare institution, barring a state or a federal mandate, really has to take it upon themselves to look at that. I think we know that the U.S. military is moving that way. I used to be an infectious doctor in the U.S. Navy, and so I know what it's like to get required to get certain vaccines. But it's in our public interest when you have vaccines such as these that are safe and so effective, are incredibly well studied, now have the same amount of safety and efficacy data that would typically be required to get full FDA approval, and are clearly our way out of the pandemic. So, we've heard that it is likely that within the next 4 to 6 weeks, we may hear the FDA will be ruling on whether, to start with, I think the Pfizer vaccine will receive full FDA approval and move beyond just that emergency use authorization, because now they have enough data, safety and efficacy data, to support that. And with about 170 million Americans now fully vaccinated, about 50.8% of all of us fully vaccinated, and more than 1 billion doses of COVID vaccines of all types given around the world so far, we have all the safety data that we need. But what we need is more people to get vaccinated so we can move to ending this pandemic as we know it. And that may end up requiring mandates or vaccine requirements in certain parts of the population. Is it possible that we could see a similar mandate for everybody? I'm not sure about that. All I know is that we need to get as many people vaccinated as quick as we can to move to the end of this pandemic.
I recently saw a story that came out yesterday about a right-wing broadcaster, radio shock jock guy who died of COVID, and he was in the hospital, and he said, he was on his radio program spreading misinformation and talking about how the vaccines are bad and he would never get one. Well, then in the ICU, he essentially went on record and said, I was so wrong, and I wish I wouldn't have said what I said. Is that something, speaking as somebody who deals with individual patients, and the fact is that a lot of these patients who are in the hospital for COVID are unvaccinated. Is this something that you're hearing from people? I wish I would have gotten the vaccine.
Yeah, it is incredibly sad to see it. In our hospital over the last 4.5 to 5 months, the vast majority of patients admitted with severe COVID have been unvaccinated. We've had a few rare cases of fully vaccinated, very immune compromised persons admitted with severe COVID. And we've had some cases of very elderly patients who are fully vaccinated being admitted with milder disease, but they're really dehydrated. But certainly a lot of patients are expressing regret as they individually come to terms with this. I think for folks who have not seen what COVID can do, either the acute critical illness where patients are gasping to breathe and are on high levels of oxygen, and they're in the hospital with us for 3 or 4 weeks or more as we try to save their lives, or those patients who survive the hospitalization, but their lungs, as I said, have so much post-COVID scarring that they're on oxygen for months afterwards, or probably for the rest of their lives. Patients, by and large, express regret. Now, I don't want to speak for every single patient, but obviously, I am curious sometimes why patients didn't get vaccinated. And sometimes it was because they just didn't get around to it, because they didn't prioritize it. And on some level, I understand that because life is complicated and busy and we all have things to do. But I would also say this, as I said, is a public health emergency, and vaccine has to be prioritized. There are some other people who, just because of how their lives are structured, that they're working 2 or 3 jobs, they live far away from a vaccine site, they're the primary breadwinner, they didn't have a practical opportunity in their day, week, or month to get vaccinated because they couldn't stand to maybe have 1 or 2 days of post-vaccine reactogenicity where they felt crummy. They couldn't stand to be out of work, or they couldn't do it because of their socioeconomic status. And those concerns are real. But there are a lot of patients recently admitted to our hospital who just say, I didn't think this pandemic would impact me. I thought if I got it, it'd be mild disease. I didn't believe in this virus. Some of them still don't believe in the virus, even as they're dying of COVID. So I think what is telling is that more than 95% of doctors around the US are fully vaccinated and have been vaccinated for a long time. And that should tell people something, I think. And so if you have a radio DJ with no medical experience, and then you have an infectious doctor whose literal job in life is to prevent, diagnose, and treat infectious diseases, of which this virus is one, I would just encourage people that if they have specific questions or concerns about the vaccine, talk to your trusted healthcare provider.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And, I don't want to beat up on folks on the right with that question either, because, if you've seen anything about this disinformation dozen, this is a bipartisan problem. And Joe Kennedy, a Democrat, is one of the big ones. And he's been an anti-vaccine guy from before COVID. He's been, vaccines cause autism. That's his shtick. Another guy is, this Joseph Mercola in Florida, who is an osteopathic physician who he sells supplements. So he's telling people that the vaccines are bad, basically, all this misinformation, but buy my thing, right? So it's so blatant and so, just easily identifiable. And I think that, that's the inoculation against this infodemic that we're also fighting, is this misinformation. Is there anything that we didn't cover in this interview that you think the public should know about this issue, your job, or anything?
I would just re-emphasize that COVID-19 is a vaccine preventable illness. And we have the tool in the form of a vaccine to end this pandemic as we know it.
Now, this is an emotional issue and the newest front in the culture wars. And rather than add to the heat, which can be very lucrative for somebody in the media, I would like to offer some perspective and common sense, which in my experience makes you a lot less money. But somebody who I think brought a sound perspective and common sense to this topic recently is fellow rural American Sarah Smarsh in the August 8th issue of the New York Times Sunday Review. In her piece, she pushes back on the stereotype that I think many of us have about the vaccine hesitant, which is that they are all rural, ignorant, angry, and poor. But that's just not true. I'm including the link to the article in the show notes for this episode, but I want to quote this portion of her piece where she writes, quote, "I cringe when I see the rampant stereotypes on social media painting the unvaccinated as rural white folks, by now a frequent scapegoat for our country's ills. Spreadnecks, I've seen them newly termed, as in rednecks spreading the virus. Never mind that per the CDC, the daily case rates in urban and non-metropolitan areas closely track one another. This archetypical bumpkin villain of the post-Trump America has long received too much credit in a country where Trumpism thrives in affluent, white urban communities bursting with college degrees. In handling the pandemic, such misdirection of attention keeps us from what we should be doing, trying to reach the vast group of people who might choose vaccination if barriers to access and knowledge were removed," end quote. She says it very well, and I think she has a point when she says we should stop focusing so much on the MAGA boogeyman, or as she puts it, the bumpkin villain of post-Trump America, and recognize that vaccine hesitancy and denial is a problem among people of all races, social classes, and nationalities. But let's put aside that for now and focus on where we go from here and how we end this pandemic. And that starts with recognizing that it's time to stop coddling the unvaccinated. It's clear that at this point, no amount of education, conversation, cajoling, incentivizing, lotteries, giveaways, or novelty rap songs are going to put us in that 85 to 90% vaccinated range that we need to get back to normal. So it's time to stop asking and insist that folks who interact with the public in meaningful ways for their jobs get vaccinated. And when I say insist, I don't mean to do it in a mean-spirited way. I mean the polite but firm way you would insist someone put on shoes and a shirt before they enter your business. And I understand that is probably an upsetting thing to hear for some folks, but vaccine mandates are nothing new in this country, and there are a few landmark legal decisions that have backed up vaccine mandates in our history. One big one was Jacobson v. Massachusetts in 1905. See, in 1902, Massachusetts was suffering through a smallpox outbreak, so they mandated the vaccine and fined those who didn't get it. Well, Mr. Jacobson didn't like that. According to Wikipedia, quote, Cambridge pastor Henning Jacobson had lived through an era of mandatory vaccinations back in his original home of Sweden. Although the efforts to eradicate smallpox were successful in Sweden, Jacobson's childhood vaccination had gone badly, leaving him with a lifelong horror of the practice, as he put it. So he refused the vaccination, saying that he and his son had had bad reactions to earlier vaccines and as children, and that Jacobson himself had been caused great and extreme suffering for a long period by a disease produced by vaccination. Jacobson believed that his family may have had some sort of hereditary condition that made the smallpox vaccine particularly dangerous. Because of his refusal to get vaccinated, Jacobson was prosecuted and fined $5, about $150 today. Over the next 3 years, until his case reached the Supreme Court of the United States, Jacobson argued that subjecting him to a fine or imprisonment for neglecting or refusing vaccination was an invasion of his liberty. The law was unreasonable, arbitrary, and oppressive, and that one should not be subjected to the law if he or she objects to vaccines, no matter the reason, end quote. However, the Supreme Court didn't agree with Jacobson, and it was Justice John Marshall Harlan who delivered the decision for the 7-2 majority that the law did not violate the 14th Amendment. The court held that, quote, in every well-ordered society charged with the duty of conserving the safety of its members, the rights of the individual in respect of his liberty may at times, under pressure of great dangers, be subjected to restraint, to be enforced by reasonable regulations, as the safety of the general public may demand, and that real liberty for all could not exist under the operation of a principle which recognizes the right of each individual person to use his own liberty, whether in respect of his person or his property, regardless of the injury that may be done to others, end quote. Real liberty for all cannot exist if the rights of the individual trump other people's right to live free of harm or bodily injury. Our liberty and freedom is also put in jeopardy if we allow others to knowingly or unknowingly carry and spread a largely preventable and potentially deadly virus. I'd like to thank Dr. Johnson for joining me as my guest for this episode, and you can catch the stuff that I had to cut from that interview in a special overtime segment in the show notes of this episode online. Join me next week to learn about a vaccine outreach program aimed at the Hispanic community and hear from one woman who decided to get the jab because of it.
Flooring is the foundation of decorating. It sets the tone for your home and reflects your lifestyle. At Apple Valley Floors to Go, their goal is to help you make that choice a great experience. You'll find extensive flooring options at their beautiful East Wenatchee showroom. Engineered hardwoods, laminates, vinyl planks, carpeting. Do it yourself or have their professional installation team do the work for you. Family owned and operated in East Wenatchee.
Hi folks, welcome to Save Mart. How can we help you today?
We're looking for a recliner.
Okay, right this way. Go ahead and move this chase on the other side. You can lift this up.
Great, I want that one. I would like that one.
That's a great choice.
And I want this one as well.
Okay.
And I definitely want this one.
Ooh. You'll find it at Save Mart. Full service at a low, low price.
Dr. Divis is proud to announce that Dr. Taylor Pedigo has joined the Wenatchee Dental Arts team. After much research, Dr. Pedigo chose Wenatchee Dental Arts as the place to practice and Wenatchee as the place to live. Dr. Pedigo is an honors graduate of the UCLA School of Dentistry and has made our valley his home. Wenatchee Dental Arts offers complete comprehensive dentistry from routine teeth cleaning to sedation dentistry. Wenatchee Dental Arts now offering 2 dentists to serve all your dental needs. Call for your appointment today.